Hello, everyone. This is Raphael.
I'm Lauren.
We're the Pacheco siblings, and welcome to the Hypercube podcast, a talk show in which two siblings converse about anything and everything. Alrighty, welcome back. How you doing?
Good to be back. Oh, I'm tired.
Oh yeah, I know. We've been doing some weird times lately, and we're doing my morning again, your evening, and. Yep. The sun is just coming up for me. So I'm pretty awake though, because I'm apparently a morning person. So my wife tells me.
Yes, you are.
Really?
Listen, it takes me an hour to open my eyes after I wake up. All right.
Fair. I guess when you put it that way, I guess I'm doing all right.
Well, you've got like a whole morning schedule and everything, and like morning routine and things. Like I try to keep a morning schedule, morning routine. It does not work. Like if I'm lucky to get a half a sun salutation when I wake up now.
Well, to be fair, my morning routine has been significantly streamlined since my injury. I have not been doing like my morning exercises and stuff. So that saves a bit of time. However, I should probably get back to those because I'm doing a lot better now. Physical therapy is definitely helping.
Absolutely, man.
But that being said, I had a particular topic I wanted to talk about today. And one that's been kind of on my mind a surprising amount this year. And it just seems to be something in, I guess, my own personal journey and learning that is a topic that just kind of keeps coming back up, which is I wanted to talk about a philosophy of money. I think that's quite relevant because right now, I think it's safe to say after our series of recent life changes that we're both in positions, we're out of that kind of liminal stage, right? Like we have fully transitioned, I feel like, into our new stage of life. However, it does feel a little bit more, I guess, fragile and precarious compared to where we were before. And I think we've been thinking...
Well, that's how transitions work.
Fair. That's fair. Change is never easy, but... we're both in positions basically where I think we've both been thinking a lot about money lately. And on the podcast, of course, you've been chronicling your goal to reach, to make $100,000 AUD in a month or in a year.
Before taxes.
Yes, before tax.
Very important distinction.
Yes, gross. Very gross.
In one tax year.
Exactly.
So I'll know by the end of it.
So you've been kind of chronicling that journey, but I think that does open up a larger question, right? Then about money and about wealth, about goals, about our philosophy of money. And I think when I brought that up, I can't remember if it was on the podcast or off. I think it was off, but I brought up the possibility of this topic. You kind of started talking about getting down to like our definitions of value. And I feel like that might be a good place to start because that's fair. Yeah. It might not be useful to just start talking in a deeper philosophy of money without like defining terms here, because defining terms is always a great base point to start. And things can get very confusing just from a communication standpoint if you don't do that first. It's not necessarily, I guess, intrinsic to where I wanted to go with this topic. However, I do still think it would be a good idea. But I'm curious where... It's
always good conversation because everybody has an opinion on money. And people who don't have an opinion on money have the strongest opinions on money.
That's completely fair. So I guess where were you going with that?
Well, that's the thing. It's like when people talk about money, they usually are talking about wealth. And when people talk about wealth, there's also the saying health is wealth, and health is not money. Money can equal better health. But, it's like the kind of thing where when people talk about money and they talk about value, they talk about how things that make their life richer, like even the word rich, right? Rich means having a lot of money, but it also can mean of good quality or, being really tasty. But even in our language, the things that we use to talk about money and value overlap, but are not the same. So I would like to talk about how we differentiate money, value, wealth, those kind of things, right? Like what those mean to us. Because when you talk about money, I want to know exactly what you're talking about when you say currency, right? Like literally dollar bills, or the ability to be financially stable, because those can be two different things, right?
That is very true, especially in today's world where so many things are abstracted, right? Like first off, so much of our currency is just digitized and like literally abstracted. And also there's many different forms it could take, right? Like investments are like very hypothetical money, and yet they still count towards your kind of gross net worth.
Your net worth.
I suppose just net worth, not gross. But Yeah, like that.
Yeah, technically the same thing.
But that is very, very abstract, right? Like there's not, I mean, there is something literal that represents. However, it's not there, right? Like you can't just like go and grab it.
But it's all because of those kind of things. And especially with currency, all money is based on agreements. Like dollar bills don't have any intrinsic value, right? You cannot do anything with money
with the paper,
unless the piece of paper, like you cannot do anything with that unless the other person accepts that as a valid form of currency, as a valid form of value, as like this represents time that I have spent and I would like to exchange it for time that you have spent creating goods. It's something abstract that has been turned into something tangible. That's what currency represents. And most people don't interact with money that way mostly because you don't have to. And it's definitely not something that you have to understand to use money, but it helps understand when you come to talking about your definitions of value. Because if you only think about money as like a means to an end, right? Or like, I want to buy a house, I need more money. That's all there is to it. So what do you need to do? You need to work your butt off. You need to do all these other things. Then that is certainly one way of doing it, but there are other ways to do it, right? Because like if you think about different ways to acquire value, then you start realizing like, well, value can also mean connections. If I make the right kind of friends, if I meet the right kind of people, they can help me achieve this goal of acquiring a house. If I meet a builder, he might give me a good discount on like literally physically building a house. And these things are not money, but they do add value to your life, right?
Yeah. Like there are things that are of value that like contribute to your life, things that you could otherwise get with money, like you just said in that instance, right? Like you could, like there are things that you could get with money, or you could just have relationships, right? Where someone just like willingly gives you something that is of monetary value, but it didn't cost you currency. But what
it costs you is social currency.
This is true.
There are lots of different kinds of currencies, but again, there are most of them, except for literal dollars, or exchange it for whatever your local currency is. All that is, like we were talking about, it's hypothetical, it's non-tangible. It's value that has value because both sides agree that it has value. Currency is the only time that somebody has tried to take that hypothetical, non-tangible value, turned it into something concrete that you can touch, like a banknote. It says it represents as an amount of money, right? It doesn't. Right. It isn't an inherent thing that has value. It represents something that has value.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I guess, a fascinating ordeal because again, it is very abstract, but it's based on so many social constructions that are pretty universally agreed upon as far as like things that humans agree on. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty normal for someone to accept currency, right? Yeah. And which is like
in our culture.
Yes, in our culture, right? Like, which is pretty insane, like the sheer scale at which this is agreed upon.
Years and years and years of legislation.
Exactly.
and cultural, what's it called? Like cultural conditioning.
And civil development and all of that has basically led us to this point where banknotes and currency are pretty universally, for the most part, accepted as representations of value that you can exchange for other things of value. And I guess that's ultimately how we're kind of defining money here.
Yeah, because the things that I've always said this, you've heard me say this before, but the only two things that have value are space and time. If you have space, you have you exist in a physical space. That is valuable. That's you. You can interact with things around you, right? That's valuable. You have time. You are alive. You are moving through the era of time. That is value. But also because space-time is a thing that exists that we know is kind of like a pretty basic thing in our universe.
Right.
And
it's pretty fundamental.
It's pretty fundamental. And when you boil down literally anything you can think of, it will come down to the fact that it exists. And if it exists in space-time. And therefore space and time are the only thing that have value. That's my reasoning, at least. It is not useful in most situations to think about things like that. It is not useful to think about a chair as only having value because it exists at a space and a time. It's valuable because you can sit on it. And that's, for the most part, how most things are. But uniquely in money, currency turns time into a like spendable currency because you spend time at a job and they, in exchange for that time, they give you money. They give you currency. That's your wages. Or if the person who created that chair, right? They spent time creating that chair. They spent time learning how to create a chair, and it resulted in the chair. Like time is the most basic form of currency, and money is the most direct, literal translation of time into value.
Yeah, that's a pretty succinct way of putting it. Because essentially, yeah, and we've had this conversation plenty of times off podcasts, but that's essentially what it boils down to, right? Time and space are the things that all of our value systems are kind of based on. Hence why wages are typically paid hourly, unless you're on a salary position. But that being said, that's basically what the exchange is money is kind of a way of quantifying time, basically, right? Quantifying your time and efforts. Like you said, put in hours at a job, produce something of value, and that value, the time you spent creating that value, gets revalued back to you. And it's just a way of quantifying the work that you're contributing to the general whole of an economic system. And so there we have it. That's money.
I also want to, before we get into what you want to talk about, because I think this is more going into the direction of what you wanted to talk about, because I got my philosophical BS out of the way. How would you define then things derived from currency, or things derived from having money, like wealth, or I don't want to say success, because like success is too broad, but like how would you define wealth? How would you define being wealthy?
Well, I remember
for a lot of people, it's like a dollar amount.
Yes, a lot of people have a set dollar amount. I remember we were once asked that question and we had very abstract answers. I think my kind of answer to like, at what point do you consider yourself rich or successful or what have you?
Specifically rich. Specifically,
I suppose,
because you can be successful in being poor.
This is true. I think my answer for a long time has been like the moment I know, or I would say that I am rich, is when I have all of my needs met, as well as a fair bit of wants, without financially stressing about it, basically. And
yeah, no, that's basically, I think that's pretty similar to my definition.
That being said, I mean, that is something that is kind of ephemeral as well, right? That comes and goes. There have been at points in my life where I could say I had that, and it was great. I would say I was wealthy at those times. And like, for example, right now, like I said, after this huge period of transition, I would not say I'm in that place right now. There's quite a bit of stress, actually. And but that's a different situation, right? It's ephemeral. Wealth is something that can come and go. It is something that you ultimately don't have as much control over as you think. And it's something that is just part of a larger ecosystem with so many other moving parts that you're just one part of.
And we're talking from the point of view of people who live in the bottom 99%.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. There are a lot of people doing it, there does exist a very small portion of people for which money is literally no object. They could not spend that amount of money if they tried. Like literally could not spend it. There is a group of people for which that is true. However, that's not what we're talking about.
Yes, that is true. We're talking from a point of view of people who do come from like working class backgrounds. And there are definitely a lot of people who might not find these definitions relatable because they have never once stressed about money in their life. But that is, I do not know if that's our audience. If it is, we should start a Patreon.
Yeah, if it is, share some with the love. Share some both.
So that being said, this has been a topic that has been on my mind a lot this year, and it feels like it's been a bit of a recurring theme, not only because of like the various factors going on in our personal life, but just in my own learning and my own journey. It's something that just keeps coming up again and again. And there are a number of different things I want to talk about in that regard. First off, I've been thinking of a certain person.
Okay, sure.
This individual in question they were a Scottish immigrant who came to the United States. They were very, very impoverished back in Scotland.
Sure.
They came from a pretty low-class family. They're dirt poor. They managed to scrounge together enough to immigrate to the United States, where they touched down in Pennsylvania.
Oh.
And this boy, his parents were both pretty enterprising. His mother was actually really business savvy, and he really looked up to her. His father was also pretty enterprising, but not very good at it, which is oddly relatable. But he touched down in Pennsylvania at a pretty young age. He started, getting into work as people did back in his days. This would have been in the 1800s. And, people tended, especially impoverished people, tried to start getting into work as early as possible, sometimes before they're legally able, which I guess there's still a fair amount of that going on today. But
yeah, it was even a lot more like lenient back then anyways.
Oh, for sure. For sure. You could get away with it probably a lot easier back then than you can now. You can still get away with it now, though.
Just a quick note. At first I thought you were talking about Hamilton, but then I realized until you said he landed in Pennsylvania.
No, not Hamilton. And 1800s, not 1700s. But he started working from a pretty young age. He got a job in the telegraph industry. That was a big thing at the time, right? People were doing telecommunication, which was quite miraculous, considering that things used to move at the speed of mail. And all of a sudden, the world was a lot more connected. It was pretty spectacular. I mean, the Industrial Revolution was spectacular in general. So many things had been going on. And this wasn't even the first Industrial Revolution, right? There's just a lot going on in his lifetime. Telegram's a big thing. Telecommunications. He gets a job as a telegram operator and starts building up there. Eventually transitions kind of into the rail industry, namely through his telegram experience, though, right? His job as a telegram operator, he got pretty skilled at it. And so people that were above him would look at him and be like, that's a guy I want. You send my telegrams. And so he made some pretty good connections that way and ended up being a telegram operator for, I think, some sort of rail tycoon who was acting as a mentor figure, basically, for a while to him. And he kind of turned him onto investing. And things kind of took off from there because he made some pretty good choice investments pretty early on with he took out a loan to make his first one, but it paid off because it was in a rail company that was about to boom. And rail was just a big thing during that era in general, right? We were starting to connect the United States via railroads, and iron was a pretty big deal. Basically, that investment skyrocketed him into another kind of strata of wealth that he had never known before. So he started doing a lot more of that, a lot more investing, became, fairly wealthy, was able to revisit his homeland of the UK. And while he was there, he encountered some business people that basically turned him on to the idea that iron isn't the future, steel is. And which was a pretty novel idea at the time. So he came back to the US and he's like, I'm going to get in on the ground level in the US on steel because this is going to change things for railroads. And it did. And
Pennsylvania steel.
So, yes, Pennsylvania steel. Exactly. Yeah, Pennsylvania.
The whole thing.
Steel was a huge industry for Pennsylvania, particularly because of this guy. And
I'm assuming that's where it's going.
Yes. So he founded this huge, basically steel empire in Pennsylvania, made some of the biggest steel mills, and eventually sold that empire for a pretty large sum. He, like I said, he started in poverty, but quickly became the wealthiest man in the world, eventually, at one point. He was eventually surpassed by Rockefeller, but for a period of time, he was the wealthiest man in the world. But because he came from such poverty, he had this idea that he had this dream where he kind of dreamed when he was younger that if he ever became wealthy, he would give away most of his wealth. For a long time, he was accumulating a lot of wealth and not quite sticking to that goal, but he still had it as like a dream in the back of his head. And eventually thankfully, he married someone who helped keep him accountable to that goal. Because I'm sure if you become very wealthy, it's very easy to convince yourself out of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But thankfully, he married someone that he made sure would keep him accountable and be like, hey, you promised you were going to do this. Do it. He didn't marry until pretty late in his life, though, because he was apparently very committed to his mother and so committed to her that he refused to marry until she had died.
Oh, wow.
So interesting things going on psychologically there, but that's neither here nor there. But as soon as his mom died, basically, he married. And his wife was actually really instrumental in keeping him accountable to that goal. And within the last 18 years of his life, he gave away 90% of his fortune. $350 million at the time, which was about $6.5 billion in today's money. Right. So a substantial amount of money he gave away and gave to charitable works, and was also a really huge advocate for other wealthy people doing the same. And he wrote pretty extensively about this. So if you haven't figured out, the person I'm talking about is a little fellow by the name of Andrew Carnegie.
Right.
Carnegie Steel, which he sold to JP Morgan, and has since become the basis of U.S. Steel Corporation, which is actually a pretty big one. I've actually working in a job that is actually in the steel industry right now, and that is a name that I have seen come up. We do a lot of business with them. I've received a pipe from them very recently, and they're still a huge company, still an absolutely massive company. But yeah, this is. You could see the Carnegie name plastered on a lot of
Carnegie
things.
Hall.
Throughout the U.S. Carnegie Hall, Carnegie Mellon University, Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think I didn't remember the name, but I think I knew who you were talking about because I recently watched a video on the life of JP Morgan. I was like, wait, this kind of sounds familiar.
Yes, he did ultimately sell Carnegie Steel to JP Morgan. Yeah, in a massive deal, but extraordinarily, needless to say, extraordinarily wealthy person, right? Like we're talking, right. When we get into names like JP Morgan and Rockefeller and Carnegie, right? You're talking about like American nobility that has experienced
basically
a level of wealth that is, like, I would say literally unfathomable, right? Quite
actually, yes.
Yeah, quite actually unfathomable. Like when you're talking about those amount of dollar bucks. Haley's been showing me a lot of Bluey lately, and dollar bucks is just hilarious to me.
Is that their currency?
That's a thing they say in the show. I think that's just Bandit being a dad, but dollar bucks. But yeah, when you're talking about those numbers of dollar bucks, especially in that day, like, that's an unreasonable amount of money, right? You can't even comprehend that. And somehow, over the course of 18 years, he did find a way to spend, to give away 90 million or 90% of it.
That's the thing. It requires giving it away. You cannot spend that amount of money.
Fair.
You have to give it away at some point.
Yeah. And I think that, and that has just been an interesting illustration, I suppose, a case study for me in wealth and generosity and, I guess, journeys, right? Of somebody going from some of the most extraordinary poverty, right? Like most people in the US just cannot even imagine the level of poverty that he came from. If you read descriptions of it, it's just like, that is fully squalid, you would say.
Yeah.
And from that side of the spectrum to like the complete opposite of unfathomable levels of wealth.
That's the other thing is, like, a lot of people talk about like the levels of wealth and everything, but like when people think about being poor, there's usually only one level of being poor. It's like you either have it or you don't, right? But there are definitely levels to poverty, and people throw around the word poverty, but I don't think they realize what poverty actually means. When most people think of poverty, they usually just think about being poor, having a little amount of money. Poverty means having no money, like nothing. Like you don't have any reason, any method of getting out of this monetarily. There is no way to buy your way out of poverty. That's like the problem of poverty. Like there's nothing, right? Like it requires an outside influence. That's not the same as being poor. It's which is different.
Yeah.
Or being broke.
Right.
Which is another level of a different level of being poor.
Yeah. I mean, and case in point here, right? Like moving to the US, like it requires a fundamental change in circumstances, right?
Exactly.
To get out of poverty. Because it just wasn't happening. It just wasn't happening where they were. And like I said, his mother was pretty an enterprising individual. But it just couldn't be done, right, in their situation. And so, that's like a pretty extraordinary journey, right? And I think it probably is that particular perspective that even allowed him to have the inkling of the idea, right, to give away that amount of money. And it's really difficult oftentimes, right, for people to have that perspective without living it. It's possible for sure for a person of sufficient empathy, but it's really difficult if you haven't lived it. It kind of ties interestingly into a lot of other things that have been on my mind. Here's what's been on my mind. Let me tell you where I've been mentally this year. So first off, this year, I'm a big fan of the Bible Project podcast and the Bible Project in general. Amazing nonprofit animation studio and multimedia company now that is based out of Portland, Oregon. They do incredible Christian media. Like it's just, I don't think there's anyone doing it better than they are. Like their animation, the production quality is just extraordinary. And also just their research and their theology is just their biblical study, I should say, because technically I keep having to remind myself different things, right? Biblical scholarship and theology, completely different areas of research. But that being said,
is it?
Yeah.
Or there's some like overlap. One nested in the other?
Yeah. Well, I guess you could say this either way, but like there is some overlap.
Well, I guess that's true because theology isn't just like Judaism.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, there's theology for every religion that has deities in it. But with biblical scholarship, that's mostly examining the text, right? And understanding its history, the language, the construction and literary nature of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like there are completely secular Bible scholars, right? Like Bart Ehrman.
Yeah, well, because that's just like literature.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just like it is just the study of that text. And you, like I said, there's a lot of overlap, but they're technically different applications. Whereas theology is someone who comes in, is just like, OK, assuming the text to be true. Right. What is into interpretation? What does this text say about the deity figure? That's what theology is. And just scientifically trying to understand the nature and character of the deity figure that is portrayed within the text. Whereas biblical scholarship is the actual just study of the text. So Bible Project, amazing studio. I also listen to the Bible Project podcast quite regularly. So shout out to another podcast. It's really awesome. But one thing they were doing this year is a really ambitious project that they've been working on for several years at this point, and they are finally releasing it. They have been finally releasing it throughout 2024, which is they've taken 2024 and set it aside to focus entirely on Jesus's perhaps most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, and going through it line by line, and just over the course of a year, going through it on every podcast episode and releasing a whole animation series, kind of going through everything that they go through on the podcast. I think I've talked to you about their format where they have like these long form conversations and research on the podcast. And then they basically
condense it down.
Yeah, they condense their conversations down into a script. They're basically just filming recording their writing process, right? They condense those conversations down to a short script that then gets turned into the animated videos that you see on their YouTube channel. So they've been doing like both, right? It's part of the larger animated series, and they have been having all these conversations on the podcast, going through and just breaking the whole Sermon on the Mount down line by line, word by word, and over the course of a year, which is, a pretty extraordinary amount of time to spend on just a couple chapters of text. So yeah, it's highly detailed, but I've learned so much from this series. Highly recommend it for anybody who's interested in any kind of biblical scholarship. It's really thorough and really amazing. And the animated series, I guess, is basically all out now, so you could like binge the whole thing. Really awesome stuff. But that being said, Sermon on the Mount is, needless to say, a really influential, I guess, text even outside of Christian circles. Secular people have been very influenced by it. Gandhi was highly influenced by it. People like that had like very little to do with Christianity have been highly influenced by the Sermon on the Mount. Very influential text. They kind of opened the whole podcast series kind of getting into a whole bunch of different like pop culture references to it. Basically, they kind of compile a bunch of different times it's referenced in songs and stuff, and it's actually pretty awesome. It had like U2 and what's his name? Bob Marley, right? Bob Marley, highly influenced by apparently the Sermon on the Mount as well, and references it in one of his songs. But it's right. It's just a very influential text in and of itself. And so it's been pretty extraordinary to just kind of deep dive into that and slowly marinate in it over the course of the year. But that being said, Jesus actually talks a fair bit about money in the Sermon on the Mount.
It was a big deal. I remember there was
you cannot serve God and money is a quotation that comes directly from there. If you have two tunics, give to one that has none, and stuff like that, right? All these different things just all kind of were teachings of Jesus, and a lot of people forget about that. But it's been said that Jesus taught more about money than any other subject. And I haven't really fact checked how true that is, but I have heard scholars confirm that's like he did indeed talk about it a lot. Like it was definitely on his top 5, of topics to hit. Not to derail too far into politics, but I think because of the fact that in the United States, we have there's this weird sort of in the West in general, there's this weird sort of marriage, right, between the Christian subculture and conservative politics subculture. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think there's like this certain amount of that like gets just tied to just fiscal responsibility, I think, is how a lot of Western Christians kind of understand the degree to which he talked about money. Mm-hmm. But I think especially when we talk about the conversation we had today, and especially after listening to the Bible Project's whole series, I'm like, I think it's a lot deeper than that, actually. Not a little, because, Jesus was not a simple fellow. It's a lot deeper than that, because it's not just talking about like fiscal responsibility or just mere generosity, but just expanding our ideas of what generosity means was kind of what he was in the business of. Because like we said, money is just an abstraction. It is a quantification of very real, tangible things. Mm-hmm. And the very, very real, tangible things, right? Like he says also in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Store up for yourself treasures in the sky, because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And like, what are our treasures, I guess, is the larger question, right? And it's also worth noting, I learned from this series that the word treasure is also a very interpretive word to use there, because the word in the original Greek basically means, it doesn't directly mean treasure. Like I said, that's an interpretation, but it basically means like stored up things. So it's just like store up for yourself your stored up stuff. Things. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, what does that mean? Yeah, you pretty much nailed it on the head. Just stuff, right? Like, what is the thing that you are hoarding, right? What is the thing that you are banking up? And basically a lot of his philosophy that he exposits there is this idea that you shouldn't put your trust in those things. We store up things. The reason humans store up things is out of a desire for security, essentially, right? That's basically what it comes down to. That's why a lot of people that have experienced extraordinary hardship do become hoarders, because early in their life, they had like this sense of urgency, and
it's an evolutionary advantage when you are in a survival mode to have a lot of things.
Exactly, right?
So then once you are outside of that setting but you maintain that instinct, then you fall into hoarding practices.
Exactly, right? Like if you experience great scarcity, it is a pretty natural response to desire to keep things. And that's something
because you didn't have it before, you might not have it later.
Exactly, right? Because you're constantly like plagued by this mindset that this could be gone.
Yeah, and you know what it's like when you don't have it, and you don't want to go back.
Mm-hmm, exactly, right? And so that's where a lot of that particular malady kind of originates from. But there's a certain amount of that presence in all of us. There are things that we like to hold on to as a means of security, right? It could be, it is money for most people. I think that's fair to say, but like it could be anything. It could be, material possessions. It could be guns. It could be whatever it is that makes you feel safe at night, right? And basically this Jesus guy is coming along and saying, nah, anything that in this world that you could place your security in could be gone tomorrow, right? There are people who have lived in nations where they wake up one morning and their currency is worth zero, right? Like that is something that can happen, right? Like all of a sudden you just wake up the next morning and your entire nation's economy has just tanked to the point that your money, these dollar bucks that you've accumulated, become literally worthless, worth as much as the paper that they were printed on. And that is a thing that can happen, right? But basically, it's just getting under this principle that nothing in life is certain.
Yeah, nothing is permanent.
Nothing is permanent, exactly. And so there are transcendent things that, however, last forever, is kind of the point that he was making. And those transcendent things can be experienced here on Earth. And I think that's kind of part of the another issue I have with broader Western Christian thought is that, like, there's this understanding that there is an abstract out there, right? Like a heaven that is this disembodied reality that we're trying to get to, right? Not actually what the Bible teaches. It's not a story about us getting to heaven. It's a story about heaven coming to earth. And the idea is that there are things on this earth that we can experience that give us a foretaste of that. And one day we'll know it more fully when the two become one. But at no point is there meant to be this kind of disembodied reality, because humans are meant to be embodied. And humans are meant to be incarnate. That is just a part of the way we were designed, and it is called good, and it is just a desirable thing to be embodied, and it's the way we were designed to live. And so the things that we experience here on Earth that give a foretaste of the things that are eternal are things that I think we have all experienced, right? When you have these ephemeral moments in life that are fleeting, but you give you a sense of the transcendent, right? Things like, I don't know, late nights talking to someone very close to you and not noticing the time flying by, or, meals that you've shared with close friends who, during very special seasons, or even like weddings, graduations, just these kinds of moments. Whenever you experience something really special during that, right? There is something implaceable that you feel inside of you that you can't quite define. And you realize like that to me is where you find that transcendent reality, is in these special kind of liminal moments in life. And that is something, though, that can be cultivated with generosity, because, what Jesus kind of gets to is basically this idea that these things are fleeting, right? You don't know if your wealth will be there tomorrow, but relationships you build, what you spend your life doing, how you spend your life using your treasures, that matters, because those things cultivate the real thing, right? Which is like relationships, right? When you give a gift to someone, you're cultivating something that can't be taken away, even if the gift disappears. Even if the gift is burned up in a fire, right? There is still the exchange of that gift has cultivated a real human connection that cannot be undone. Because that is more transcendent than the material thing. Or, feeding someone, sharing of your resources. And ultimately, it just leads into this entire kind of broader philosophy of generosity that he's getting into. And then they also, on the Bible Project podcast, as part of this series, at one point, they also re-released an old episode they did that I hadn't heard before. And I actually listened to it. It was very fascinating. It was very unusual compared to their usual format. It was more of a documentary style episode, right? Complete with like interviews and stuff like that. And they were talking about two different people. The episode is called God and Money. I'll link to it in the show notes. But they basically profile two guys who met at Harvard Business School. And these were people that were like two pretty successful people. Fair to say, they're at Harvard Business School, and not because they had to be, right? Like they chose to be there to like further already successful careers. And so these people were already in a pretty upper strata of wealth. They go to Harvard Business School. They meet each other there, the two Christian guys, and during their time there, they do a research paper on Jesus's teachings about generosity. And it basically, long story short, it changes their life, changes their whole outlook, and gives them a whole different perspective of generosity that really kind of changes their trajectory in terms of what they want to do with their money. And as part of this research project, they actually managed to interview a whole lot of people who are like basically really wealthy Christian alumni of their school. And they get a whole lot of like very like frank, candid insights about the way extraordinary wealthy and generous people were like spending their money. And they actually were able to get a huge amount of detail out of the interviews they conducted, which they eventually compiled into a book. And it was just very fascinating to hear just the levels of radical generosity that some people were engaging in. And like, there's just fascinating stories that came out of that really gave me, as someone who does think a lot about money and is pretty financially literate, gave me a lot of just thought, right? Like just fruit for thought. Like there was one individual they profiled in one of their interviews who was like, I don't remember what industry they're in, but they make a lot of money, right? Like we're talking like millions of dollars a year. They like spend or give away like an overwhelming majority of it. And it's just like the way they justify it is they're just saying like, yeah, I could reach my retirement goals in a year, or I could do it in 60 years like most people do. And I'm choosing to do that instead, right? Like it's just like I'm going to choose to slowly accumulate by like giving away a majority of my earnings and just take the route that is just more normal to the human experience, really, right? Like, because it's like I don't need that level of wealth to be comfortable. And the main thing is actually they asked them too. It's just like, how do you do that? How do you spend that much money that quickly? And apparently he had a very interesting answer, which was he takes out massive insurance policies.
What does that mean?
You could like stuff like life insurance policies, for example. Well, there are some that like there aren't like huge upper limits on them. So it's like you could spend an extraordinary amount of money on a really quality life insurance policy that will just make sure, his family is set for generations if something happens to him. But in the meantime, he gets to spend more of his money on just taking out this massive insurance policy. and things like that, right? I'm like, I didn't even think about that as a possibility, because you were talking about how like insane and difficult it is to like spend that level of money. It's like, oh, I guess that is one way to try and spend much of it.
Well, yeah, I guess one way is to give it to people who are asking for it. Insurance really, really asks for money.
They do. They very much do. So yeah, like that's one thing that you could like purchase, right? That can help you to spend money really fast. And then of course, no shortage of charitable endeavors that you can give towards. Although that gets kind of complex in itself, because technically giving away to charity does accrue tax benefits that then can like come back on you. So it's like you end up, because that's, just part of the way the US works, which is very odd, because a lot of people are very concerned about like the welfare state and like, all these poor people getting handouts, when the truth is an overwhelming majority of the US's welfare goes towards the top 1% of our population. It's this weird thing that people don't often think about that. But the majority of that welfare goes towards tax breaks. Anyway, that's just, I know I've been ranting for a while, but that has been kind of where my mindset is going. And it's kind of just, I don't know. I've been on this journey of trying to take Jesus's teachings more seriously, think more intentionally about generosity as well, with the understanding that I do still have to meet my own needs. And I do have a responsibility to a family now, right? I'm not alone, as we've talked about prior. That kind of changes your outlook as well. I do have that responsibility. But when my needs are met, right, and if I meet my goals and manage to increase my financial stability, what am I to do with that, right? Because I know I can fall into this trap, and I think I have been quite a bit lately, of searching for that security, right? Of like, how much do I need to save before I feel secure? Mm-hmm. With the understanding that I have found what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount to be true, which is basically like the more you give away, the more you have. Right? Mm-hmm. If you act as though you have abundance, even if you're struggling, you'll quickly find that you have abundance. But partially because things you're investing in are like, you are investing in something, right? It's non-tangible, but you are investing in something. And you develop relationships, you develop connections, you develop things that ultimately cannot be taken away and that make your life richer. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
This might be a topic for This might be a topic for a second, or for another podcast, or maybe just a separate discussion. I've had this theory for a while, and maybe hearing you talk about that, like, is just bringing it back into my mind. I don't remember where I heard this or something, just like it just entered my mind. The way that I've always seen Christianity is basically Buddhism meets Judaism, right? And you sound pretty Buddhist.
Really?
Obviously there's the details change, but like a lot of what Buddhism kind of teaches is detachment from natural or from material things, right? That's one of their bigger teachings.
Right. Classic monastic.
Embracing the transcendent and But especially when it comes to money and generosity, it's basically identical.
I mean, as I've pointed out before, like I believe in general revelation, right? Which is this, there's these two different kinds of revelation when we're talking about like theology, right? There's divine revelation and there's general revelation. And divine revelation is like what like the biblical text itself would be, right? Which is just something that was inspired by God and it's like a direct message from the creator. Whereas general revelation is this idea that basically, that, to put it simply, that God can be deduced, right? That with a sufficient amount of observation, you can get these truths. And so I think it's kind of baked into my belief that, like, this isn't exactly reinventing the wheel here. It's just a great story that exposits to us the conclusions that can be arrived at naturally. And it's a story that is part of a larger cosmic narrative as well. And that's where I think really what makes the faith more unique is its sort of cosmic level view of what your kind of destiny is as a human being. Whereas, but that being said, I don't think these principles are necessarily, I guess, unique in that sense. I think it's perhaps the best formulated version of it, to me at least, but it's that I've heard. But I do believe it is something that other people can arrive at, right, with enough observation and thought and all of that.
I think what the thing that Christianity really captures is its relatableness, right? Like Jesus was just some dude, and he was extremely intelligent and had a lot of really keen insights, but for the most part, he was just some dude. He wasn't like born into priesthood. He wasn't a nobleman. He wasn't like an avatar. Well, he was an avatar of a deity, but in a sense, he didn't come down on like a flowing sense of in flowing robes and just incarnated into his 13th,
like fully formed.
Yeah, fully formed. It's like I am now the avatar of Jesus, or I'm now the avatar of God the Father and the Holy Spirit, and this is the way things are. He's just like, bah, I'm a baby.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of like what Christianity has over most religions, so why it's been so successful. And pretty much why it's won the West in culture is its relatableness, right? Is we all kind of want to be that. We want to be that normal everyday person who's like, oh, this Messiah is somebody I can go have a beer with. It's like,
and he did.
Literally did in a certain point for like 30 years. He literally did. Yeah, but I think that's kind of like the thing is like it takes these really heady, abstract concepts and brings it down into our level, right? Like this wasn't religion for priests. This was religion for the masses.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't in that whole Catholic thing where like you had to speak Latin to understand what was going on in mass, but you went anyways and you didn't know Latin because you're illiterate, which is a whole thing. Sorry, I just cursed. But I have a lot of thoughts about Catholicism, but it was just some dude talking frankly, right? It was, this is what I believe. These are the thoughts and teachings that I have. And I'm just going to tell you them in plain English or in plain Greek, in plain Hebrew, in plain whatever he needed to do to get the message across. Because the most important thing wasn't following the religion. It was living the lifestyle, right? It wasn't just teaching that you had to be generous and you had to be all these things. He lived it. And by living it, which I think is like the primary message of Christianity, is that the best way to get people to enter your religion isn't to tell them, it's to live it and to show them that that's the most whatever pious life or the most holy life. Like, is to live the example and then people will follow. And
for sure,
especially when it comes to generosity, that's pretty much the only way to convince somebody that you're to give something away is to live it and then have them follow, because you can't just tell somebody to give things away. They usually won't.
Right. Unless you're really charismatic and
well, that's true. Con people,
yeah, can convince people to give a lot of money away just to you.
To be fair, and I'm not saying anything directly against your religion specifically, but those two tend to overlap a lot.
Well, I guess the thing you got to be cognizant of is who they're asking you to give your money to, right?
Exactly.
Is the
because other people
difference.
Because other people giving your money to other people. If giving your money to other people means giving it to the church, which means giving it to the preacher, which means giving it to the one guy, maybe think about investing in something other than that one guy. But so you want to talk about money, but you really wanted to talk about generosity. Talking about,
I guess so. I think, ultimately generosity has been kind of a recurring theme. And I'm curious what you think about that, considering that you have like these lofty goals and of the amount that we're trying to accumulate here. And I would say I have fairly lofty goals as well, but I'm not quite as setting a target as much as you are. But I will say I have pretty lofty goals.
I gave myself the 100K goal simply to gamify things, because I know at the end of the tax year, I'm going to get a thing back that says, that's how much you made. I'm going to go, oh, I did it. Or, oh, I didn't do it. That's basically, that's it, right? That's the entirety of the 100K goal, is just the fact that at the end of the tax year, I'm going to get a big fat tax statement that says, that's how much you made pre-taxes. And I can just compare it and say, oh, okay, well, I was $15,000 off, or I was almost there. But you know what? I know I'm not going to make it, because 96K was the max I could possibly make with the 2 jobs that I have now. And I haven't been working for about 2 months at my main job because of, I think, just paperwork issues. Anyways, the point is, I know I'm not going to make the 100K, but that wasn't the point. The point was to have, to get to a point where I can be financially stable. I just gamified it by giving it an amount. In a way, I did the thing that I said, where I was like, oh yeah, wealth means a number, right? But I only did that because I wanted to. I don't care if I hit the 100K or not, because that's not important. What's important is that I know that where I'm at right now, it's going to take years before I can get to the level where I'm going to be comfortable. So for this 1 year, I wanted to see how much I could do. And if I can, reach that goal, like let's say cruising, right? I can reach my goal of being, let's say, wealthy, which to me, wealth is described as when the moment that I have excess, right? Which is the same definition as you, just a different way of getting it. When all of the money that I have, when all of my needs and all of my wants are allocated for, and then I have this chunk at the end where like I finally have $1 more than what I need combined with all I want, When I have that dollar more, I am now wealthy because I have excess. And that is just a dollar that I have nothing to do with, right? It's just sitting there doing nothing because I already have all I want. I already have all I need. And the grace in wealth is minimizing what you want, because it's very easy to say, oh, well, now I want this. Okay, well, now I want that. And suddenly you're stuck with 17 houses, 13 yachts, and a continent. And it's like, well, okay, now it's like, I could want more, but really, you have everything you need. Wants are things like spiritually fulfilling things, not more stuff. Stuff is things you need. And if you can minimize, once you realize that the things that you need to survive are actually kind of small, and the things that you want usually don't require spending money. I mean, it does require spending money to get there, but you're spending money to get to that transcendental thing that you have, right? Like you're talking about nights with your partner, or just like going out having experiences. You can do that with a little bit of money. The want isn't supposed to explode into infinity. The wants are supposed to be kept to minimum. Once you realize that balance, so that's the grace of being wealthy, you realize that becoming wealthy is actually very, very tangible, or very reachable for most people. Once you have all of that taken care of, that $1, $2, $3 extra is now dead money. It doesn't mean anything to me. That's when I become wealthy. That's my definition. So at that point, that money's better off being shared, right? Because I don't have anything left to do with it. So if I don't have anything to do with it, I can give it to somebody who does need it, or give it to a cause, or invest it in something else that will give me security later rather than now, right? And that's kind of like, I think, yeah, so that's my definition of wealthy. And I know that's not going to happen anytime soon, especially because everything that's going on right now with living in a new country, but also restarting my life, I know there's going to be a lot of like big things coming right now. So even though I have money in my savings, that is money that is set aside for stuff that I know is going to happen. It's not just like an everyday living in all this other things. Like I know eventually I'm going to have to move out of here. So that's going to require a house or an apartment. So the money that I have now is all going towards that, which means that is still money that I need. So even though I have money in savings, I do not consider myself wealthy. It is going to take years before I have all of my needs met, and then I can start focusing on my wants. I'm trying to remember where this started. Okay, so my goal, because even though it would be very, very nice to be generous early, I know from my min-maxing brain that I can be generous now, or I can wait until all of my stuff is settled. And then I could be more generous later, because being generous now will delay my goals, which will mean getting to that wealthy point later. So let's say, just throwing numbers out there. Well, I guess it is this common problem. It's a philosophical that thought experiment where if you can build a spaceship now with the technology that you have and exit the solar system, not being able to go faster than light towards a new Earth or whatever. Or you can wait 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now until we develop faster than light technology, and then instantly go past us where we would have gone if we left now, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is the gamble is, do you wait to potentially have that instantaneous like boom of technological advancement, or do you go now and just hope you get there before that happens? Because like maybe that advancement never happens. So I am currently banking on I'm going to wait until I can give more in sum total later, as opposed to starting now and being able to give more over being able to give less, but over a longer period of time.
And well, I guess that's always, I guess to challenge that a little though too, is I guess that's always like a kind of conundrum that's facing most everybody in some shape or form. However, I guess isn't that...
Well, that's not to say that I'm not giving.
Yeah,
I was going to say, because that's true. When I say giving, I usually mean charitable things, because like literally charities, like giving my money to charities is usually what I think of. Because community things is different. Because donating my time is where I'm at right now. I haven't been able to give away my money because that's set aside for getting my goals.
Because that's the purpose right now.
Yeah, because it's all been accounted for, right? Like every dollar that I have is being set aside for something very specific. Therefore, my needs haven't been met. But my time is different. My time is something that I can't really give it freely because I am working jobs. I am working
Well, and like you said, it's ultimately the thing that has value, right?
Yeah, I can't give it freely, but I do have more than I need. I'm not working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So the extra time that I have left over, I'm spending, hopefully, trying to expand my friend group. I'm trying to further my relationships. That's where I'm at when it comes to being generous, or my generosity. It hasn't yet moved into the monetary, but I always have something to give, whether it's my services, whether it's my time, whether it's my like generous isn't about just giving away money, obviously. And you were talking about that. But when I think about being like charitable, I'm actually thinking about charities, like like services, like being like donating what's it called, like repeated payments towards a charity, toward a cause that I believe in, or towards building a community, as in like physically giving money to build like community services. Like I can't really think right now because it is late, but
right.
The first thing that came to mind, like, like donating towards like community theater, or like community, like local community arts, like that kind of stuff.
Or a library.
I would love to do that. Yeah, like I would love to be able to do stuff like that. I am physically incapable of doing that right now. What I can do is talk to people.
Yeah, I think I hear you. I think we know each other well enough that you anticipated my challenge before I even issued it. You basically answered me. The audience will never know what I was going to say, but
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Well, basically, just to preview it for the audience, it's basically along the lines that is like, isn't that what every rich person says?
Yes.
Right? Is I could always do more later, but it's like that can be an easy justification. And obviously, I don't think it can necessarily has to come off that way for us, just because it's not like we are like coming from extraordinary wealth to begin with, right? Like we're not like
yeah, we haven't inherited a dime.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but just for clarity, right? Because I could see how it could be construed that way.
But here's the thing, right? Okay, so you initial conversation, you wrote me into thinking we were talking about currency or money, but we're actually talking about generosity. But going back to talking about currency and money, and talking about like acquiring that much stuff, right? Because financial literacy touched upon it briefly, but that is something that we also didn't have. It's something that we had to learn. And it definitely wasn't passed down to us.
Yeah,
I'll say that much. But financial literacy is also a kind of wealth, because it is an investment in making more money, or any kind of learning. Okay, so learning is basically what I'm trying to say. Learning is the best investment you can make, because you learn how to learn, and you can learn anything. If you learn how to be financially literate, you can make more money. But it's it's $1. It's not about nose to the grindstone and just a direct one-to-one transfer of time to $1, but it's about how to multiply that time to get more, right? That's where financial literacy comes in. It's being able to use your time as efficiently as possible to make the most amount of money as possible. And sometimes that is literally just an investment in a tangible thing, just giving money and getting a return. But it's also learning how to spend that time in ways that will give you more value, like we were talking about before, in creating a community, in surrounding yourself with more capable people than you are, so that they can fill in the spots where you're weaker. All these things, all these investments, all these things that can be done are investments. And financial literacy is one aspect of that kind of investment. Being able to turn your $1 into more $1. It can be just nose to the grindstone, acquire as much wealth in a one-to-one exchange as you can, and then retire at 60. Sometimes that works. But with the way that the economy has been going recently, that's less and less more likely to work out for you. So yeah, I'm mostly just ranting at this point, just talking, like spewing my thoughts about pontificating. I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? No, because while you were ranting, I had so many thoughts, and I'm just like, oh man, that's a good point. Oh man, that's also a good point. He's still going.
Yeah, sorry. I know this was a bit of a lecture on me. That's why I wanted to make sure. I know we're going a little over, but I wanted to make sure you had a chance to make this a little less one-sided. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like we both have lofty ideas about that. And especially, well, first off, let me just go off of something you were saying a second ago about financial literacy as an asset and stuff. And it just kind of reminded me, I know we're going over, but I'm really invested in this conversation, no pun intended. And I did want to make sure that I
that's the name of That's the name of the podcast episode right there.
Invested in the conversation. But I didn't want to relay this anecdote to you because I thought it was kind of cool. Sure. You're talking about like financial literacy and kind of basically optimizing your money management. And like, obviously, like wealth is something that you can optimize, right? That's where financial literacy comes in. No matter how much money you have, knowing how to manage and steward it well is something that can help you, right?
Make your money work for you.
That's just the thing. But in the God and Money people episode that I was talking about, the two people that they profiled, those Harvard Business School grads, one of them had like, they basically were both people that were in the pursuit of optimizing, right, their money and their money making ability. And one of them literally just like sat down and like literally did the min-max thing of like that a lot of min-maxers do for RPGs, and just sat down with a spreadsheet and just did a bunch of research and just tried to calculate what job they would have to pursue in order to make the most money with the best work-life balance. Mm-hmm. And they went all the way, they laid out this whole spreadsheet and went all the way to the corner to figure out what min-max optimizing is the best exchange of most money you can make for best work-life balance, right? For your time. Mm-hmm. And you know what was in the farthest corner? Being a dentist and a petroleum engineer.
What?
Yeah, apparently those were the two options of what he could do at that time. I don't know if it's still the case of like the most money you can make with the best work-life balance. Those are
two very different career paths.
yeah, for sure. And he decided he didn't want to look at mouths all day, and also a petroleum engineer is actually fairly entry level. So he ultimately went down the petroleum engineer path and got into the oil industry. And turns out,
I'm assuming got it.
Great way to make money.
Early.
Yeah. That's a whole thing. But I thought that was very fascinating to learn about, like someone actually doing that, the whole min-max thing, and figuring out what is in that corner. Because I guess I've been curious about that. That being said, it does sound like we do have a fair amount of overlapping ideas. And I think ultimately we do have high ideals about generosity. I know you do as well, in ways that you haven't entirely talked about even in this podcast. But it's, I guess it's just something that makes you more human, I think, and gets you more in touch with what it means to be human. And I think now, as we're going into this new phase of my life, and there is that instinct to kind of cling and put my security in my money, but also realizing it's just like, there is enough, right? Like, I'm not going to die if I, go out of my way to do something that is financially costly, but like helps me to invest in relationships. And now as we're starting, Haley and I have been doing a lot more hosting lately. And that's something I want to talk more with you about, because I have found hosting to be profoundly rewarding. And
absolutely,
it's just something that just fosters so much connection and so many good times. It really is, like, hosting is, dare I say, the activity that does invest in the transcendent, right? Like, it is like a shortcut to getting to those liminal moments I talked about earlier, right? Like, it's just like, if you want to like foster the ability for that to happen, just do something that makes you spend time with people, basically.
Raph,
sorry, what were you saying?
Just really quick. What's the definition of church?
That's a complicated question. But basically, I mean, it is a community of believers with whom you do life. And there's two different levels. There's the local church, I guess, which is the with whom you do life part. But there's also the church universal.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the local church for now.
Everybody.
Right. Mm-hmm. Talk about the local church for now.
That is what the local church is meant to be. I think that is a mission it has sort of drifted from. And it's, at least here in the West, in my experience.
Like, what I'm trying to say is, like, the definition of church can basically, be boiled down to like the place where like-minded people gather, right? Mm-hmm. Every time you host, you are creating church.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Because when the experiences that we have had as a couple hosting, like, are the experiences that make me sit down and be like, this is it. Like, this is what the first century church AD looked like, right? Like, this is
exactly right.
Like, right when I'm doing that, I'm like,
church has become institutionalized.
Exactly.
Maybe it becomes outside of my
No, I could rant on it for sure. I have full liberty. It has become such an and I have no problem with institutions. We have to do a whole other episode on philosophy of institutions.
We need to talk about institutions.
I think institutions, I've been more convinced, especially thanks to the thought work of Curtis Chang. I've been more convinced of the value of human institutions as a valuable part of society. But I think institutions are good, but I think institutions with a solid idea of their mission, institutions that are like living their purpose are in a healthy way are what's great. Institutions can quickly become unhealthy. And I think obviously the Western Church has so many problems. I'm not silent about that. And I think really there's so many times where I have these experiences with friends and with hosting, and I'm just like, and I'm recognizing from just my knowledge of history and biblical studies, that's like, this is what it was meant to look like. Right. Yeah. And it's just not that for the most part, right? For a lot of people's experience of church, and the typical experience of church in the West is just not this anymore. I'm like, how do we get back to that? But I mean, I guess small groups and things like that are like starting to bridge that gap, and other emergent parts of the culture. But it's still, ugh. Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole
drifting
different.
a little bit from the subject, and we need to start ending soon.
Yes,
I'm going to
sure.
say one last thing, and then I think we can. Yeah. So one last thing, right? Is especially when it comes to church and like the broader sense of church, where like-minded individuals coming together in the same place. Church is never, ever, ever, ever a chore. It's something that happens. It's not something that you have to do on a specific day. It's not like, oh, well, it's church time. It's like, oh, what do you know? We had church. That's what church is, right? Is like, it's something that happens.
Yes.
It's the church isn't something, it's not a destination. Church is the manifestation of like-minded people being together. And that community, that experience has been given the name, or has been given has been attached to the word church, has been attached to that sensation. Church is not something you do, it's something that you did.
Mm-hmm. I oddly agree with you a profound amount.
No, I don't think it's odd.
No, yeah, 100%, 100%. That's what it was. That's kind of like what it was always meant to be. And
I think okay. At some point, we need to sit down and have a deep theological discussion about, because like you obviously have a very deep theological understanding of like Christianity, and I also have a very deep theological understanding of like my spirituality, but I don't think that's ever been talked about. Like,
no, yeah, for sure. But 100%. I agree with you. I hear where you're coming from, and I actually think that is true and spot on. But that being said, yeah, we do need to wind down.
Yes.
But my point is, hosting has been something we've been doing more of lately. We're about to do it again tonight. We're starting a home D&D game. I'm so
jealous.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
We physically don't have space to host people.
Really?
You couldn't sit down more than 4 people in the space we have. Like, you can't.
Yeah, no, it's been such a rewarding experience, and it really does feel like the start of like finding our people here. Because we are surrounded by some good friends that we're trying to get closer to. And that experience of having the space and the means to be able to host people, to be able to cook a meal, to be able to share food,
that would be amazing.
And games and all of that has just been life-giving.
Raph, shut up. You're making me jealous.
Yes. I hope you can get that experience.
We've been looking forward to being able to host people for a long time. Like, I
didn't know you guys had that interest.
Just going for. Oh, absolutely. We're contemplating. Well, especially because Rose likes. We're supposed to end this freaking thing. Rose has been trying to be able to get people in so we can like. She wants to have that host experience of being able to sit people down and like cook for them and like have that whole thing. Because she's never had that before. But oh man, like we just literally do not have the space.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But
we're thinking of just like going for it and figuring out a way to do it. Maybe going somewhere else. But
well, however you do it.
Either way.
I mean, it is, like I said, it is a life-giving experience. And I think that's what I want to be the final note. But that being said, I think that's it for today's podcast. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been the Hypercube podcast. This show is mixed and edited by Raphael Pacheco with original theme music by Mono Memory. Until next time, we'll see you all later. God bless.
Peace.